Jump in and ask a question? Michael, a lot of students find Bernstein's work, exactly as you say, too abstract. But I do know that you encourage some of the students that work with you to use some of his work as well.
Definitely.
For example, Lionel Lim. So how do you introduce such abstract concepts? Because you do think that the theory is quite, powerful. How do you introduce those abstract concepts to your own students? And including your own abstract concepts, because,
I have no abstract concepts at all. All right. First of all, I have been influenced, and some of you know I spent a lot of years, and still do, going down to Brazil, and have worked with the Workers' Party there. And I was lucky enough to have as a friend Paulo Freire. It's interesting, I never read Paulo Freire until I had finished my doctorate. I come from what would now be called critical pedagogy, but it's laborist tradition of radical work in the United States, sort of anti-racist stuff and anti-corporate stuff that we would call critical pedagogy now. But we didn't have that vocabulary in the United States. It was, you're doing that because of the long history of socialist labor politics and anti-racist politics. So I start out with people's lived experience. So tell me what's going on in schools. So we will start out often with teachers' diaries, with the debates that the right is engaged in. So I'll start out with two books. This little book called Democratic Schools, which is that I did with Jim Beam. It's the politics of interruption, of stuff. Here's what teachers are doing in the face of all these kinds of things. And something like Paul Willis, Learning to Labor, of people struggling. And I'll say, look, what's there, what's missing? Since I think, following Pierre Macheret, that absent presences are crucial. What's missing is just as important as what's there. And I'll have people respond and say, look, does this connect to your lives, past or now? And they'll start talking about class and about audit cultures and about how depressed they are. I'll say, okay, now we want to think about, is there anything we can do about this? But in order for us to interrupt this, we better figure out what's really going on. Then Bernstein is introduced. What's really going on needs to be understood. So here's someone trying to do it. It's very hard. I am not going to lecture on this. There will be a pedagogic working group on this book. I will meet with you as often as you want. You have to struggle to help all of us understand that. And here's, honestly, the parts of it I thought I understood. Now I don't. Okay? Okay, so now you present it in class. Don't look at me while you're presenting. I mean this quite seriously. There's a pedagogy that goes with this. And help each other. And then we will have 2 sessions just on earlier stuff, on volume 3 of Class Codes and Control, which is still my favorite book of his, since it's the introduction to all these kinds of things. Now, so I want to democratize the pedagogy about it. And then we'll read criticisms. But I don't want any criticisms being read until, you'll forgive the masculinist term, we master it. Okay, so what's right and what's wrong with it? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Well, here's some stuff that follows along about that. But I need to connect it. And again, that's an epistemological as well as political commitment for me. But it is tough going, and there are times when it's very frustrating. There are parts of it I really disagree with. But that's part of what makes it powerful. Huh?
All right. Our real final little question was kind of cheeky, but it was to think about, like, you're here in your life's work, and still at the coalface as far as I'm concerned, no matter where you are in the education system. Talk about democracy and education. What's like a lasting legacy or a thing that Bernstein's given all of us to keep working away in the area of democracy and education?
It's the ultimate question that he asked. If we change relations of production, will that change schools? If we ask, what have I, so we can, people say there's 3 Apple trilogies, 3 sets of books. So what have I focused on in the last set, from official knowledge to educating the right way to can education change society? Okay? It's that question. What's wrong with class reductionism? If we change class structures, does that handle all relations of oppression? No, it doesn't. Are schools workplaces? If they are, is it worth struggling over them? No. So I'm struggling with that question, and I think it's worth. So that's what he left. That's where he left us, and that's why the issue of subjectivity became so important to him. Could people understand this? So basically, he's working in a traditional Marxist. I don't think people understand that. Traditional Marxist questions about, is consciousness false? How do we understand people's consciousness? And is it always reproductive? So that tension over, is consciousness totally reducible to one's economic position? Are schools simply economic institutions? Where do we interrupt them? Are they places that are worthy of struggle? That's been my agenda for the past 20 years. I had that before, but certainly Basil helped me on that. I think I actually think I am closer to it. And for some of you who were in the conference last time, over the last 3 days, if you're at my plenary, you're going to hear it again. I'm sorry, since I'm still working on it, but that's where I am. I'm trying to answer that question. Okay?
Can I just jump in, because Michael, the question that you had for your plenary, it was, as soon as I saw it, I thought of Basil, and I'm trying to remember the title again.
Can education change society? And
his was, can schools compensate for society?
Yeah.
So there's quite a distinct orientation
I think that's the wrong. His question is the wrong question.
Right. Because he asked that question in the 1970s, but then if I read Rob Moore's paper, Thinking with Bernstein, and I read back over Bernstein, I think he was always trying to argue that schools can disrupt relations.
Exactly.
And you've been saying that as long as I've heard you, that if the right can control education and they can make it do whatever for their interests, then surely the left should be taking that angle and seeing how schools can, not in a sense reproduce society, but in fact, Basil's paper, Totally Pedagogized Society, was actually saying that our relations now, our social relations, are becoming increasingly pedagogized. And we've actually stopped, we've actually, looking in the wrong direction. We actually have to look at how the very thing that we're good at, education, is actually being taken over completely by all of these other industries, and we've got to understand the complexity of the pedagogized relations.
But that means that schools are worth struggling over and understanding. Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah.
I'm conscious, I think, do you want...
Just one question. I'm struggling with this one, is the Foucault turn in Bernstein. You just mentioned that, Michael, and I would just be interested in what you thought about that, because he takes up Foucault in the structuring of pedagogic discourse, and he argues he's got something different to say than Foucault had to say. I personally think it's a much more powerful line than the kind of line of power, knowledge, power. He's trying to say something more, but I don't know whether it was fleshed out in a way that was accessible to too many people.
No, and I'll be damned if I understand it.
Fair enough.
Okay? No, I mean, that's complicated. First of all, I am not a Foucaultian, though I've been influenced by it. I am very, very worried that the arrogant post, and there's parts of the post that is not arrogant, has seen itself as a replacement strategy. And one of the things I value about Bernstein, and it's what even though I criticized it earlier, is that it is structural. I think that the world is not discursive. I think that power relations are misunderstood if we see them as only discursive. And I think that some of the best post work doesn't do that. So I don't think you can't understand my work in educating the right way unless you understand how I've been influenced by post stuff. Okay, it's about identities and how they're pedagogized, etc., and how particular mobilizations go on around discursive shifts. Okay, but I am very, very worried about the turn to the post as a replacement. Capitalism is visceral and real. Gender and sexuality, we make discourses about it, the discursive relations of power, but people die, right? And they die. And I want us to be honest about that. And I think it destroys the emotional reaction to simply deconstruct it and forget about the human bodies that are there. So we talk about bodies in this strange, disembodied way, and that worries the hell out of me. And maybe because I grew up poor, that it's on my mind more, but it offends me, okay, even though much of it is brilliant. But I must admit that later stuff of Basil's, I can't read it in a pristine way because I'm so caught up in the debate over that stuff that I don't spend enough time trying to understand what Basil's arguments are. So I must plead ignorance about that. That's the stuff that makes me nervous. And that's a pity because now I have to go back. So thank you. I'll have to go back and reread that material. But because I am so caught up in the debates around that, anyway, I'll stop. So I just have to plead, I'm not ready to answer that question.
No, thanks, Mike.